So you may well very legitimately be wondering how the hell I got 40 minutes out of talking about charging devices. And the answer is that in many years of festival going, wild camping and then cycle touring, I've had an awful lot of experience of trying to keep devices charged for the period you're away and trying to recharge them on the road, particularly when you're wild camping and cycle touring. So as I started telling all those stories and the things I've discovered and what works better than other things and how power banks actually work and how some power banks are much better than others, even if the specs look similar, and all the rest that you'll hear in this video, that turned out to be an awful lot of information in it. So I didn't pad it at all, honestly. It definitely nerds out a bit at the end. I have a section at the end with spreadsheets and stuff. You can probably skip that if you want. But otherwise, I'm going to bring you through a range of devices you might want to charge, how power banks work, better ways to use power banks, and hopefully you have learned something by the end of it. So today, my fellow e-bike adventurers, I thought I'd talk about electronics and charging. And what I've done here is I've laid out a variety of the things that I bring with me that need to be charged. And that does include the phone that I'm filming on this as well, but I couldn't get them all in. We have my GoPro here. We have my GoPro charging case with batteries in it. We have my head torch. We have the DJI mics. We have a headphone earbud. I use this for navigation so that when I'm cycling along, it's giving me turn-by-turn directions, which is useful at not missing points. We of course have the battery of the bike itself. In fact, there would be two of those on most tours I do. And also we have my watch sitting here as well. And I reckon that I've probably forgotten things. So how you keep everything charged is quite a challenge, particularly if you're combining your e-bike traveling with wild camping, because obviously there are generally not sockets available in the woodlands. Now, in the video on keeping the battery charged, which is still my most popular video by far, and I shall stick a link up to that now, I talk about how I do that in practice, and basically that involves a lot of opportunistic charging. So I might stop in a pub for a couple of pints and charge batteries while I'm doing it at restaurants, car ferries, there's a range of points like that. Cafes in petrol stations in Ireland actually tend to be quite good. They often have sockets. So that's one way of doing it, but particularly if you're doing that wild camping thing, you need to optimize what your charging regime is, and you also need to work out what the best way of charging a lot of your devices is. So that's what I'm going to talk about. This is also relevant if you're staying in a campsite. It won't be very popular if you hog all the charging points, for instance. And even in fact, if you're being as such, because there are ways of making the experience easier so you're not having to hang around. So is a way of plugging your phone in. So your standard Apple type charger, most phones come with equivalent ones, looks something like this. There's a single socket, you plug it in the wall, you charge your phone. Okay, that's great, that's going to charge your phone, but what about all the other devices you have? So the sensible thing to do is to get some form of multi-charging device. So this one has three sockets coming out, two of the old type USB and one USB-C. And it also has two plugs in the front. So one plug on the back, two plugs in the front. This is a great campsite one to have because it's not that unusual in a busy campsite. You'll walk in and all the sockets will be taken. So what you can do is unplug one, plug your own in, and then you can either offer somebody else an extra socket or more likely you'll be plugging your battery in. But it basically means you're always going to probably be able to get a socket, even if they're all in use when you walk into the room, without taking one off anybody else, obviously. And you're going to be able to do with this to charge your battery for the bike, and also charge 3 other devices. So perhaps I'm going to be charging my phone, my watch, and maybe the GoPro battery case. And I'll talk about that battery case in a minute. Then another option is this one. So what this is, if you're traveling long distances and you're going to be in areas that have different types of plug formats, this one is one of these clever ones where they slides out different plugs. So it's not very big, but it does it in loads of places. It's actually got 4 charging ports underneath it. It's got 2 old school USB ones and 2 USB-C. And it's got what's called pass-through. So in other words, you plug it into the wall and then you can plug another plug into it. So even in that busy situation, if all the sockets were in use, perhaps you'd at least get to charge your other devices while you were waiting for something to charge your bike to become available. It's also got a socket on the side, another USB-C one, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute because that's what makes this one, in some circumstances, much, much better than this one. Okay, so the next thing to consider is obviously this is a lot of equipment. The batteries on some of these go pretty quickly, right? So the bike battery, we've talked about that, I have the long video on that. I won't talk about that further here, apart from the fact that if you're doing very long distances between charging opportunities, you might want to be carrying 2 batteries rather than 1, so you have some security about that running out. But I also have my phone. Now my phone is the Apple Pro Max 15. So the advantage of that is it's actually quite good with power consumption. And in a normal day's use at home, I can basically, I never let it go below 20% because that tends to damage batteries, and I don't charge it above 80%. Apple added this setting that basically turns off charging once you hit 80%, and that does me in my day-to-day life. If I'm touring, the battery usage will be heavier because perhaps I'm doing navigation on it that will have an appreciably larger drain, but I'm also taking lots of photos and videos. But what I can also do is I can put it into low power mode. Basically low power mode, you're not even going to notice the impact it has on the phone. It's doing less background checking. It's not checking your mail for new mail as often, but it's probably doing it every 5 minutes instead of every 10 seconds. You really don't notice the difference, but it extends the period your phone will retain charge quite a lot. And then you can even put it into airplane mode. That phone in airplane mode, it's using about 1% of power per hour, basically, if you're not really doing anything with it. That's, by the way, a good thing to do at night if you're not turning it off altogether, because that way you've almost as much charge in the morning as you had when you went to bed. So that's that. Now that is also where this side connection comes up, because what that is, that's a fast charging port. So a lot of these plugs with the pop outs, they'll have one port normally on the side, and that'll be a fast charging port. And if you have a device that's able to make use of this, now that's the important thing. It doesn't work with lots of things, but it will work with a lot of phones, for instance. And what it means is it will charge your phone at the maximum rate the phone can take in terms of watts, which in terms of that iPhone, that's 25 watts. So these other ports are only putting out sort of 5-6 watts, that sort of thing. So one thing I should say is that in the video I switch a fair bit between microamps and watts, and in both cases I'm actually talking about microamp hours and watt hours, right? They're both ways that capacity of devices is expressed. Watt hours, I think, is the better one. Watt hours about 3,600 joules, and it's actually a measure of energy contained in something. A microamp hour for a given voltage is an expression of capacity. So you have to then compare what voltage the device is charging at or is outputting at in order to compare one with the other. Whereas the watt hours, I think, enabled direct comparisons between one item and another a bit easier. So my Bosch batteries, for instance, are 500 watt hours. Each battery contains that. The larger power banks, I think, are 55 watt hours, so a little bit less than a tenth of that. So the difference in in terms of charging time is that with that side port, it'll fully charge that phone in about an hour, perhaps even quicker actually. With the older ports, that will take a couple of hours. That also comes in when we talk about power banks. I've laid out my range of power banks there, and I think I will move on to them next. Now, power banks are the things more than anything else. I have bought new ones and replaced, and I've some old ones. These are not, in fact, even all the ones I've had in the last decade. There's other ones I passed on to friends because I've no longer any use for them. Idea of a power bank, you probably know this already, is you charge that from your mains electricity, and then when you're on the road and you want to recharge your phone or maybe the GoPro, you plug that in and it takes the power out of the power bank and puts it into the phone or the GoPro or the head torch here perhaps. So that's obviously great. The disadvantage of them is they're big and they're heavy. This is a 20k milliamp one. And that's, they're they're adding a good bit of substantial weight. So they're also expensive. That's the other thing. I have just bought this one, and that cost me €45. So they're an appreciable cost. And the third disadvantage, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that, is when you charge a power bank and then it charges the device, you're not getting 100% of the electricity that you put into that power bank. But typically the available electricity will only be about 2/3 of what was actually put into it. So the energy that goes in and the energy that goes out to, say, charge my phone is only going to be 2/3 of what goes in. That is also relevant to those ratings. If they say they're a 15k rating, that's the rating for the electricity going in. The electricity going out will actually only be about 10k. And as they get older, that becomes less efficient, so you're losing even more. So that's one thing to know about them for sure. The other thing is that, say with the phone for instance, internal phone batteries have got bigger as phones have developed. So while it used to be that something like this was useful, I think that's a 2000 milliamp power bank, it's now pretty much useless for most of the devices I have on the table here, because it wouldn't hold, it would hold about 1/3 of a charge for that phone, right? So I need 3 of those to charge that phone once. Probably not really very useful to me at all anymore, except as an emergency sort of backup maybe, so that I know if I run completely dead, then I can probably recharge the phone and get 4 or 5 hours use out of it. But otherwise not very useful. The first one that's useful here is probably this 5k one. Still only going to charge that phone about 60%. By the time you factor in you're losing 2/3 of it. But it can be useful with, say, the GoPro, right? So let's talk about that for the moment. GoPro, the batteries in these are, I think, 1720 milliamps, which is actually substantial enough. Two of them, 3 of them are about the same as an iPhone battery. And it gobbles them. I mean, if you're shooting video, you'll be lucky to get an hour video out. The time warp setting I like to use, which gives you that kind of fast, smooth time-lapse video, I get about 90 minutes from a single battery. So if I am cycling 100 kilometers, I'm probably going to need 4 batteries if I want to record that entire 100 kilometer trip. And in fact, that's what I have. I have 4 batteries. The battery that's in the camera and the batteries in this charging case. So 1, 2, 3 sitting in there. So charging case, what's the use of that? So you can plug a GoPro directly in, get a USB-C cable, put it in, but it charges very, very, very slowly. I think it might take about 3 hours to charge a single battery. So if I need 4 batteries a day, 3 hours to battery, that would be 12 hours to charge that way. Completely not a runner, obviously. The charging case, on the other hand, has a single USB port, charges 3 batteries simultaneously. I think it's also faster. I think it tends to charge them in about, the whole caseload of batteries in about 2 hours. So there's an obvious benefit to that. If I'm staying somewhere or I'm stopped at a pub there's only the one point I can plug into. I've only got 3 cables coming out, whatever. If I have this, I can be charging 3 batteries at once and will do it quicker than the one that will be happening here. However, there's another trick there. So if I'm wild camping, one way of doing this, and it's the way I've done it so far, is I have the 3 batteries charged, I have the battery in the GoPro, they run during the day, and then in the evening I plug that into a power bank. I turn the charging case into a power bank, and that gives me 3 recharged batteries ready for the next day. The problem is that there's 1720 each, so that's about 5,160. There you go. That's quite good mental maths capacity. So this 5K one wouldn't even recharge the 3 of them. And then when you reduce the output of the 5K by a third, it's probably only going to recharge 2 of them. And actually, I'm basically going to need this next one up, which is a 10K power bank, to get all 3 of those batteries recharged. And that's going to then drain most of that power bank. That's pretty damn heavy. So the other thing you can do with your GoPro, because you're going to be mounting it on the bike, that's the way I use it. So what you can get is you can get a pass-through door that you basically replace this door with. There's a USB-C connector here. You plug the USB-C directly into the power bank, and then the power bank powers the GoPro, and you don't get that 1/3 loss of power. So in that case, this power bank will give me the equivalent of the 3 batteries. So that's something to keep in mind. With some devices, if they are capable of handling pass-through power, then directly plugging a power bank into them is probably smarter than trying to charge the batteries via the power bank. Okay, so the other 2 things I have sitting here are my head torch. It's very light. It's got a small internal battery that lasts, I think, about 6 hours. And it's not a very big battery, so actually that I can recharge from any of these power banks, no problem at all. My headphones, likewise, the case is meant to hold 24 hours of charge, but it's holding 24 hours of charge for 2 headphones, and about a year ago one of them fell out when I was cycling. I never managed to find it, but because I only use it for navigation, maybe occasionally listening to podcasts, but mostly just for navigation, I only ever need one charged. So actually that 24 hours for just holding a charge in one of them probably actually is giving me 40 hours or so of cycling time with it, and it charges, likewise, very small battery in it, so it charges from a power bank quite quickly. So that's quite straightforward. The only issue really with this sort of device is it does need to be plugged in, and they charge quite slowly. So if you've only got your 3 cables in your 1 socket, they're probably not ideal. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was a bit more on power banks, because there's a trick here as well with the power banks, and that is, people think about capacity of power banks, and you go, okay, what I need to do is get a really big power bank. So maybe if I get a 30k one or a 40k one, then that will carry loads of charge. That will carry 8 to 10 phone chargers or whatever, for instance. There's a problem with that, which is the recharging speed of the power bank itself. So I have a 20k one here, which is the biggest one I have, and it's got the old micro USB charging port on it is the way you charge it, and then it's got 2 old school USB outputs on it, so it can charge 2 devices at once. When it's fully loaded, it's great. If I'm going away for a weekend, that's going to keep my phone charged all weekend. It's fantastic. The problem is charging it. That micro USB connection charges really, really slowly, right? Really slowly. And if you're charging it with a relatively low output socket, it's taken me as long as 28 hours to fully charge. So in other words, even if I stay in a B&B for a night to charge devices, unless I plug it in as soon as I get in, I'm getting in there early enough, I'm not even going to have a full charge by the next morning. So that's the reason I ended up buying new ones this year, because I was looking into it. This one was an emergency one I bought in Donegal when I used to have two of these, and the other one of them flooded in torrential rain and just sort of shorted out. So I had no power at all. I'd only brought the one with me. So the next town that had a telephone shop in, mobile phone shop, I stopped and said, do you have any power banks? And the guy said, oh yeah, we've this one. I said, do you know if it has a charge in it already? And he didn't know, he thought it didn't. I bought it anyway. In fact, they nearly always come with about a 60 to an 80% charge, so that's also good knowing for an emergency. They're generally shipped with a charge at that level in it. But anyway, I bought it to the nearest pub and charged it up, and then that enabled me to keep going over the next 6 days and get my phone charged. But this one has a USB-C output as well, and that charges USB-C devices faster. That's a little bit of an advantage. Problem is the USB-C output doesn't recharge the power bank itself. It's got a micro USB for that again, so it doesn't charge any faster. Hence, this year, doing some shopping a couple of weeks ago, and I got these OtterBox chargers. So this is a 15k charge. So there's two ideas I'm going here with the 15k. One is that experience of having the 20k and the 20k blowing up on me because it got wet has made me a lot more cautious. And I need, adding the new devices, particularly adding the GoPro, I now need more power than I used to. So rather than buying one 30k, I bought two 15ks, right? And part of the theory there is that if you can plug both 15ks into charge somewhere at once, even everything else being unchanged, that means that's going to charge in half the time that a single 30k would with a similar connection, because it's two devices. But the big benefit of these ones is they have a USB-C charging point, and that USB charging point is capable of taking a higher ampage. I think 5 amps, I'm not exactly sure. I think these are mostly 3 or 2, or even, I think that little one might even be a 1 or a 1.5. So basically it charges maybe about twice as fast, providing I've also got a high enough ampage coming out of my charging device. So actually, if I plugged it into this one, it would make very little difference because the sockets on this are relatively modest in terms of their output. However, this one socket on the side of that's a 30 watt socket. This can't charge at a 30 watt rate, but it is charging, I think, at 3 amps. So in other words, this charges fully with that connection in about 4 hours, right? So again, compare that with 14 hours for the big 20k guy, and you can see how 4 hours is an immediate improvement. And indeed, I charge 2 of these with 30k worth of power in 8 hours, whereas this thing would still be only about half charged at that point. So that's the purpose of these two ones. They'll recharge quickly. A long meal and a couple of drinks in a pub, which I do sometimes as I tour, would probably enable me to recharge them fully if I did that every couple of days, and that's enough to actually keep me on the road and keep me moving. Of course, I also this year, this is the problem, I keep adding new devices. So I have my microphones this year. Now the entire kit for this, as I've explained in the video on the microphone, it's not heavy, but it's not insubstantial. And it's got a receiver unit and the 2 mic units. But I tested, and I have the video up where I'm testing this out, and realized that actually all I need to bring on the road is this, a single unit. It's got 15 hours worth of memory in it, about 14 hours actually worth of memory, and also about 15 hours worth of battery charge. So I can recharge that, again, it's USB-C, off any of these power banks or any of these plugs. That'll keep me moving on the road, and I'll be always prepared. So 2 questions people often have, they're in the comment section of my video on the bike battery, is first off, could you use a Dynamo for this, right? Now, there's an interesting idea there in that I can sort of see if somebody invented a dynamo that you could engage easily just as you were going downhill, then you could use some of that energy that's going to be going to braking to recharge your devices. But a dynamo on an electric bike makes no sense whatsoever, because it's taking the energy that the battery is putting in, and again, because that transmission of energy is never perfect, you're basically putting in, for every unit of power you're putting in via the battery, you're only getting 2/3 of that power out via the dynamo. So dynamos and electric bikes kind of don't really make sense, except as an emergency charging device. However, on that subject of emergency charging, a lot of the bike control units will have a little side panel on them. Generally, it's got a little plastic plug on it, and if you get a special lead, that will generally give you a USB, micro USB output that you can charge a device from. So in other words, the battery on the bike can be used to charge my phone. Now, I carry one of those leads as an emergency backup, just in case everything else went dead, and the only way I had of charging the phone was via that. But again, because of the 2/3 loss, you probably don't want to be pulling power out of your bike battery to be doing that on a routine basis. The bike battery has about 10 times the charge of the largest of the power banks on this table, which is substantial, but I mean, at the same time, it's not like it's infinitely bigger. So I would tend to leave the bike battery alone, except as an emergency. The dynamo idea could also be a backup as an emergency, because I keep mentioning phone in this context because, of course, if you're using your phone for navigation and you're somewhere where you're not familiar and your phone dies, you're kind of in trouble. That's why a lot of cyclists still carry a paper map as well. And then the other thing people ask is, well, what about solar panels? Now, I've actually experimented with small solar panels that basically, they're typically on a power bank, so the power bank will, one side of it will be solar panels, and also a plug-in small solar panel that you can stick into a power bank and charge it up. And I am not impressed with it. It's kind of, if you're hiking away from power sockets and you want to keep your phone charged and it's somewhere sunny, then a small, that sort of size panel in good weather will maybe give you a quarter of a phone charge a day. So if you put your phone in aeroplane mode, basically, except when you absolutely have to use it, and you set out fully charged and you have a small solar panel, you probably just about it will keep you topped up. I think you definitely want to have a power bank as a backup, and they're relatively, I mean, they're not massively heavy. They're probably the equivalent of weight of this sort of 5k power bank, but they're bulkier than that. So yeah, unless you're basically going to be hiking in the middle of nowhere, you're better off carrying your 5k power bank, which will give you 4 days worth of solar panel charging. A much bigger panel obviously will charge devices. I suspect a panel that's big enough to completely charge my phone, for instance, would probably be that sort of size, maybe a bit bigger. But the problem with that is, in order to fully charge the phone, then I would have to have it somewhere for a few hours around midday with the right orientation to the sun. Now, that tends not to work that well when you're actually cycling, because you can't be stopped somewhere with a panel pointing at the sun in the right direction. So that means that instead of a panel that size to charge your phone, you probably want something that's a lot bigger, and then maybe there's a way of putting that across your panniers, for instance, on the back. Although if you're going the wrong direction that day, then maybe you're shadowing the panel. So solar panel charging like that, I don't think is very practical. It's not that it's impossible. Well, and also, it would not be much use for Ireland or Scotland, which of course is where I've done most of my touring so far, because typically there it's cloudy and it's wet, and that panel is getting not very much charge at all. I have seen people touring with bikes that are actually charged by solar panels, and setup that people who do that use are basically you have a trailer, quite a big trailer, and you have a really big panel on that trailer. Or the other setup I thought was quite clever is you have a roof. So the solar panel is forming a roof over you, and as you cycle, that's charging. People do seem to have successfully toured with those in relatively sunny locations. So in other words, might work in an American desert, an African desert, Spain in the summer or whatever else, would probably be fine, but you're not going to be touring Norway in the winter that way, because you're just not going to be getting enough power in. Anyway, here's the daunting problem of keeping your devices charged. So in practice, how has it worked for me? Well, as I've said before, I've never had a battery run out, partially because I do carry a second one. But that keeping the bike battery charged, no problem at all. Keeping the phone battery charged, that's the thing that's actually tended to give me more anxiety. Again, I use the phone for navigation. If it runs out in the middle of nowhere, then it's kind of, okay, how do I find things? So that's what I have the Powerbanks for. They keep my phone charged in practice. That one time in Mount Charles in Donegal where the Powerbank got flooded, I was wild camping down the side of a hill, and everything got wet and it was quite unpleasant, and I almost at that point gave up. I got up in the morning and I was quite close to just going, I'll just cycle back to Sligo train station and give up on this trip, because I mightn't be able to navigate. But I got my act together and said, no, it's okay, I'll go on. I bet I can find a phone shop that will sell a power bank. And indeed I did, and so I had another 8 days of touring. But I have found, as I started getting much more serious about recording the trips, and in particular when I wanted to have complete GoPro road footage, so I have, film basically all day as I cycle, then the batteries for the GoPro, charging them became quite an issue. And even with this setup, where I have the charging case, and I have this, and I set out on day one with 4 batteries charged. If I shoot all day, I'm going to have 3 dead batteries and at least half a dead battery at the end of the day. I might even have 4 dead batteries. If I'm while camping, okay, I can plug it into one of these, and it will recharge all 4 batteries. I won't have much charge left in this at all. I might get half a phone charge out of it as well. So if I'm carrying 2 of these 15k ones, that's kind of giving me 2.5 days or so, which is quite limiting. So that's why I got quite excited when I realized that instead I could say take this 10k one, I could plug it into the GoPro directly, and that would give me about a day and a half of recording from that. So in fact, if I set out with the 3 batteries, the one on the camera, and this, that's probably going to get me to most of 3 days, basically continuously, before I need to hit a recharge point. The watch takes very little charge. That kind of almost doesn't factor in. The head torch and the headphones, they're very little charge. The only thing is, it does mean that you need somewhere to plug them in, and if you're charging somewhere opportunistically, you possibly don't want to have 1,000 cables coming out in a huge bunch. Although I've never actually had issues. I've never had people objecting. I think a lot of establishments are well used to people charging their phones and other devices as they're going around. Anyway, that video ended up being a good bit longer than I intended, but I think I brought you through all the charging options. Key takeaways, I would say, is get a good charging plug. Get one that has at least one high output socket. Get one that's got multiple charging sockets, and get one that's at least pass through, so you can then stick another plug in. You go somewhere there's only one plug available, you can charge all your devices and you can charge your bike battery off it. Get one of those, they're really well worthwhile. This one with the twin sockets is very worthwhile if you particularly intend to go to campsites, because it enables you to create an extra plug for somebody else to use, and you'll be popular for that. So you may have been wondering where those little spreadsheet inserts came from, and the answer to that is I like to check things out. So when I get a new power bank, what I do is I charge it up fully, and then I plug my phone in, and I note how much percentage charge I get before the power bank is exhausted, and then I plug it into various chargers and I see how quickly it charges up again. So you don't have to do the same. These are me testing out the power banks you saw in the video. So the biggest one, which is that old school TP-Link 20K, which can take up to 28 hours to recharge on a kind of old low ampage plug. That, when I charge it, gives me a 293% phone charge. So what I'm doing there basically is, say I'm starting to charge the phone. When it's down to 20%, I charge it up to, say, 80%, and that's 80 minus 20 equals 60. So each of these calculations here, you'll see behind them is a 60 minus 22 or a 54 minus 26. So that was just me repeatedly charging it across the day to see what charge I'd get. So the first time I did that, I got 293% in total, and the second time 297%. The consistency between both tests is actually quite interesting, because I've seen that, as you'll see in the other ones as well. So that's basically, you could call that 3 days worth of phone charges. It depends how much you're using your phone on the day from that one. That weighs 380 grams. And indeed, when I was just going to shoot this video, I went, oh, I haven't weighed the 15K one. So that's down here at the bottom. And that weighs 340 grams, almost as heavy, in fact, as the 20K. It's only 40 grams lighter, but the 20K one holds more charge. Anyway, so on that 15K OtterBox, that when I do that repeat phone charging, I got 211% the first time I did it, and I did 213% on the second time I did it. That's more or less in line with what you'd expect with a 15K versus a 20K capacity. And I charged it on the first time I recharged the power bank was using that twin plug socket. That took 5 hours to get me up to 5 hours. I say, actually, I mean, I wasn't sitting there watching it. I'm not that crazy. Up to 5 hours to charge it. I'm crazy enough to go that's at least 4.5 hours though. And then when I charged it with the high wattage side USB-C connection, I got up to 4 hours. In both cases, I would say that's probably quite close to 4 and 5 hours. I'll actually retest those to get what they are more precisely, and if I have that done by the time I upload this video, I'll add it as a little caption here, so it'll be down there. So that's those ones. The 10K power bank, that was the emergency one I bought because my other one got flooded, 240 grams. So that gave me 122% of a charge. I think the OtterBox here is actually looking like it's a good deal more efficient in charging things. 211 versus 122%. It's almost not quite double it for only a 50% increase in capacity. So I think there is differences in quality as well. It's more efficient in terms of the amount of electricity it passes on. So perhaps it's not really heavier from that point of view. So we got those, and then so going back up here to that black one again, 122% overall, but a recharge time of 6 hours on that that double plug, and 5 hours on that new plug with the high wattage output. So in charging times, recharging the actual power bank itself, the really big difference here is that old school TP-Link, somewhere between 14 and 28 hours, 14 and a half hours and 28 hours. So the benefit of me upgrading to the USB-C recharging OtterBox is pretty clear from that. Of course, as soon as I recorded that last segment, I then went, oh, wait a second, maybe I should be comparing the weight with the energy coming out to get a more effective idea of weight efficiency. So of course I redid that calculation, and what we see is that actually the TP link, the biggest one I have, does win with about 0.78% of phone recharging per gram of weight. That black one that I bought in the emergency situation is the worst by quite a bit. It's only about 0.5% per gram of weight. So perhaps that's not surprising, because I was buying what they had in the shop. With the other two, I was doing a bit of research and going, oh, this one seems quite good, I should probably get it. And then the Otterbox is coming in at 0.63. So yes, the TP Link 20k one wins in terms of weight efficiency, but not by a massive margin. And actually, the margin's slightly smaller than that, because when I tested these recharging, I was testing it with an iPhone Pro Max 13, and with these figures it's tested with an iPhone Pro Max 15, and the battery capacity between those two phones has increased, but only by 0.7%, so it doesn't really impact the calculations that much. Hopefully this has been a useful video. If it has, give it the thumbs up. That enables the video to get out to more people, the algorithm likes it, all that sort of stuff. If you found the idea of e-bike touring really interesting, you'd like to maybe do it yourself, maybe you are doing it already, do give the channel a follow. The videos here are a mixture of the sort of, this is how I do that, which are always based on stuff I've been using for quite a while. So I'm not doing some sort of weird product review because somebody's given me one or something. These are all things I bought myself, I'm testing them out, I know what the problems are, so I can tell you things like, be careful about rain. I do those, and then the other thing I do is, as I cycle around places, I do day-by-day diaries of talking about the route, the challenges I face, you know, with shots of the scenery and things. They seem to be quite popular, and then after I've done a new route, I do a kind of overview video talking about you know, options in terms of exact routes, what particular challenges you might face. Scotland having relatively few pubs, so you're further between charging points, for instance, then the last thing I'm doing is kind of advocacy videos where I'm talking about wild camping, why there should be a right to access in terms of wild camping, similar to what Scotland has done, interviewing people about these and basically building it all up. So I think I have 120 videos already published as you're watching this one, and that will continue to grow. So give it a follow. Thanks.